Great. Hello, everybody. This is Ken Edelman from Balanced Body. I'm really excited here to have Benjamin Degenhardt and John Howard Steele here. We're going to talk about John's new book. It's called Caged Lion. I'm going to put it in front of my face so you can see it. It's really exciting and really a fun read. It talks a lot about just the man, Joseph Pilates, the man, and from a perspective that nobody else really has. So I'm not going to talk any longer. I'm just excited to have John and Benjamin here with us. And Benjamin's going to talk to John, and anything I can do is great. Otherwise, Benjamin, take it away.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much to the team at Balanced Body for having me and for having John. A good evening from Amsterdam. A good morning to Santa Barbara, which is where John is. And hello to everyone in between and beyond from wherever you're tuning in from. This is such an exciting opportunity for me to talk to John about his book. I've been waiting for years for it to finally hit the shelves, and it did not disappoint. And I have millions of questions, so hopefully we'll get through most of them. Speaking of questions, please use the Q&A feature if there are any questions that come up for you, and we'll try our best to get to some of those at the end. Now, first of all, welcome, John. Thank you so much for, first of all, writing your book. I think it's touched many of us in the profession and inspired us during this very difficult time to rekindle our love for this work that we have and put some more into the foundation of why we believe it's so powerful. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you for actually arranging and doing all this. These are usually a lot of fun, and I actually learned something about the book that I wrote through these things. The questions are always very searching, and looking forward to it. It looks good, Benjamin.
That's fantastic. I have listened to many of your tour stops on your virtual book tour, and I'm, again, so glad that you're here with us today. I want to jump right in because this hour is just going to fly by. And I want to get a start on your motivation for writing the book, which I know has to do with the Pilates profession and meeting people in the Pilates profession and wanting to share your story. But I would love to hear in your words what your motivations were in writing the book, and coupling that, what your first impressions are now that the book is finally reaching the people that it was intended for.
All right, there's two parts to that. The motivation, well, I look back on it, I think it did start at the PMA in 2007, where I was invited to do the keynote speech. And I came over there with a very detailed outline, and I thought it would be kind of an easy thing to do. And the first thing I did when I had the audience in front of me, which was about 300 to 400 professionals, was ask how many people, in the audience knew the name Pilates belonged to a person. And less than half put up their hands. Well, that shocked me right away. I mean, that was quite amazing. And then I asked of those that had their hands up, how many people knew or thought he was still alive? So those were the people that knew it was a person, and only half of those thought he was still alive. So here I had an audience of PMA, which I think it was its third year of really having a sort of public conference. A quarter of the audience knew Pilates was a person and had died, and 3/4 were teaching this procedure and teaching all this and didn't even know anything about the creator. So that disturbed me greatly right there on the spot. And I changed my talk considerably to, I I hoped, bring Joseph Pilates back into the picture. And then it was very well received. Ken was actually there, weren't you, Ken? Yeah. And people went out in the lobby afterwards, and we talked for, the total thing was 2.5, 3 hours. But I could see that there was a thirst for a knowledge about the man and all of that. But I didn't have it in my mind to write a book. Several people said, "Oh, you should write a book. You got great stories. Write a book." But I was very busy with my law practice and I had no idea. But I had the original motivation to stick with your question was to try to bring Joseph Pilates, the person, back into Pilates. And I kind of stuck with that all the way through the book. I had other motivations as I started to write. It's a funny thing about writing a book. You actually find out a lot more than you think you did. You think, oh, I know a lot about this. I spent time with the man. I can just sit down and write all these stories. But you run into a lot of dead ends that don't make sense. And you have to start to work those through. And then along the way, I had to find out a lot about myself. Why did I write the book? Why did I hang in with Pilates all these years? Why did I go back the second day? All these questions come up, and you start to answer them in writing the book. It's a rather therapeutic experience. The second part of your question, Benjamin, was the reaction to it. And I'm not sure if I recollect whether you want my impression of the reaction or just the reaction, but the reaction to it among the Pilates community has been astounding. I mean, I had no anticipation. People love it. It's somewhat like the lectures and all that. People are very hungry for this information. It's not that they want to know exactly what Joseph's routine was or this or that, but they recognize something in Pilates. Everyone does. And the search for what that is and the search for how to convey that as professional teachers continues. Everyone wants to know, how do you get across what really is Pilates? How do you teach people in the most efficient way? How do you keep people focused, involved? And I think the book helped a lot of people at least face the questions and in many cases answer them. And that's a motivation that came when I wrote the book. Once I started writing the book, I thought, well, you ought to get across how Joe taught, because in my mind and for me personally, he was a gifted teacher. I mean, he could just get you to do whatever he wanted with extremely economical effort. I mean, his cueing was non-existent, really, in terms of now, very little conversation. So I wanted to get that across as something that, professionals could think about, how better to teach. So that I hope I've answered both questions.
You did. You certainly did. And part of the reason why I asked about your first impressions is that I'm glad to hear that you're receiving the love that exists around the book, because as somebody who's in the profession, I can assure you everybody's talking about it. We're all sending questions back and forth. what did you think of that chapter? What do you think that means in terms of how we teach it today? And I couldn't agree with you more. I think the questions that the book raises are equally important to the answers that it provides. And again, I'm just very grateful that the book exists and that it's out there, that you're sharing it with us. And I'm glad that you're receiving the love that your book is bringing out in our world. I would love to talk a little bit about what it is that most of us love about this book. And I think it's the fact that you just mentioned that you hit some dead ends in writing, but I think you have such a wonderful gift for writing, because you're taking us on this very vivid narrative. It's like we're there with you. I feel like I'm sitting at that awkward dinner table with the Pilates. I feel like I'm taking that stroll with you. I'm living the agony of your first session and the busyness of New York. And all of those moments are so meaningful and profound because they contextualize what usually is just a very dry rundown of history of Pilates. It makes it alive. And at the center of all of that vivid storytelling is always that relationship with Joseph Pilates that you had, that friendship that you had. So I was wondering if you could take us on a journey of that very first evolution of you turning from a skeptic student to realizing that there's a friendship, a kinship, a relationship with Joseph Pilates that extended beyond the studio.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was something that, you know, I had to actually think through in the book and remember and put a lot of pieces back together. The first impression I had of Joe was long before I ever saw him. I was extremely biased against him. I thought he was one of several people who kind of seduced my mother into some kind of new agey thing. I thought he was a quack, and just from listening to her descriptions of what went on there and all that. And then my father went, and I was a little skeptical of my own, you know, my own pigeonholing of him because my father really liked it, but I still didn't give into it. And I thought, oh, this guy is, you know, he's just got my parents tricked. And so that was what was in my mind when I first saw him. And of course, when I did first see him, any doubts I had about him being a quack were confirmed. He looked like, I mean, here he was in his little shorts in November in a very chilly hall, wearing nothing but little canvas ballet practice shoes. And, you know, he had barrel chest, very sunburned skin. And he was very gruff, very rude, actually. And I thought, oh, this guy is a really, you know, I was very tempted to say the hell with this and turn around, go downstairs and leave. But I didn't, because I knew I had to report back to my mother, and it was important for me. Maybe I had a bad relationship with her, but I didn't want to make it any worse, and that certainly would have done it. So I followed him in, and the Benjamin question was about friendship. Well, that came later, but I would say within 15 minutes of that initial encounter with him, and by the way, I thought he had an equally negative view of me. I thought, you know, I was going to be a pain in his neck. Why I had to teach this Brooks Brothery kind of brat. You know, he thought I was, you know, maybe. He didn't know why I was really there. Certainly didn't believe I was there to work. And so anyhow, I would say within 15 minutes, whatever impression I had left me. I mean, it's not like I said, oh, I'm wrong. He's really amazing. No, I didn't do any of that. I just gave in to his instruction as he started to teach me his reformer routine. And I just noticed when I left or when I was on the street that I didn't have that impression anymore. It just left. He was like a horse or dog whisperer. He just got my attention, and it was so concentrated. There wasn't room to make any more of my judgments about him, and I didn't. I got neutralized, and that's a very good thing for me, and it turns out for his legacy as well. But the friendship started, that part of your question, Benjamin. The friendship, and I don't know that I'd even call it a friendship. It was an unusual relationship. I mean, it wasn't like, I could call Joe Pilates up and say, "Hey, Joe, let's have a beer," or, "Hey, Joe, I'm having a problem with this. Can you help me out?" or anything. It wasn't that. It was all on his terms, at his or Clara's invitation, and it wasn't even a two-way street. It was very much me listening to him, and it's not like he was a big talker or anything. It was me being around him or watching him or trying to get something from him, basically through osmosis. I mean, it wasn't like he sat me down and said, "John, in life you have to do this." He wasn't a typical grandfather. But the age gap was such, it was 50 some years, a difference in age, and the cultural gap was even wider than that. It was infinite. So it wasn't what we call a friendship. It was some kind of relationship where he had a need that I tried very hard to define and think about, and I'm not quite sure exactly what he saw in me, but I know it was something of importance to him. And my need was quite different, but he had this uncanny ability to see into your physical body. He saw your body as it moved. I mean, if you're sensitive enough, you can feel your muscles move. And if you really get totally tuned in, you can even start to feel how you make them move. You can sort of feel that connection. He saw that. He felt that, I'm sure, all the time. But he also saw, maybe it's the same process in his head, I don't know. He saw some part of you. He saw something about you through watching you work out. He saw your determination. He saw your concentration. He saw your ability to focus and to learn, basically. And he saw your enthusiasm. And maybe that's what he saw in me that told him, you know, John, he's not here to learn how to be a teacher, but he's going to help me keep this going. He may have intuited that. He just had that, you know, it's part, I talk in the book a lot about his survival instincts. And they were amazing. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, he left Germany the first time under incredibly obscure conditions. We don't know how he left. We don't know how he got to Great Britain. We don't know why he got caught there. We don't know what happened in the 4 years he was in prison. And then he comes back and he's gone again. And then he comes to New York with absolutely nothing and survived in a fantastic kind of way. And look, his name today is probably one of the most popular names in the entire world. Doesn't rival Muhammad Ali or Mickey Mouse, but he's up there. So his survival instincts were just fantastic. And it could be when he saw me and they saw my age and sensed my enthusiasm and my concentration, he thought he's important to me in some way. And that's why I think he had Clara invite me up for a beer or whatever. Yeah, after a session. It wasn't like, you know, he wanted to teach me anything but he wanted to know me better and he wanted me to know both of them better. So, and that's all it ever was. I mean, you know, it's interesting stories about the time I spent with him. But if you were to describe your best friend, or you would be talking in a completely different way. And even if you were going to describe your grandfather, you'd be talking in a different way. It was a very unusual relationship. And it was sort of epitomized by the way he dragged me through the streets of New York. I mean, that's what I was. I was just a hanger-oner, sort of, on his arm.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And even in reading the book and listening to your description of this relationship, I get a real sense that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that as long as you were really interested and invested in his work, it almost didn't matter who you were and what you looked like. Like that was sort of the holy grail quality that he looked for in people. Is that fair to say?
100%. He didn't care what you did in life. Most people, he didn't know their name. I mean, it was ridiculous. He would teach people. They would be there 3 times a week, and they would be coming for years, and he had no idea who they were or what they did. He had I think some of the famous people, some of the opera singers and George Balanchine and a couple of other choreographers, he knew who they were because that's how they got there. They were referred by someone who called him up and said, you know, Maria Callas, oh, she wants to come in. What does she want? Well, she wants to learn how to breathe better. She wants to learn how to control her air. Oh, well, okay, who is she? And then he would find out, and maybe it didn't impress him in any way whatsoever. So he hardly knew anyone. And that's true of everyone else. Mary Bowen who I talk to frequently about this, she went for, I think, 7 years, and she was, I think, one of the few people he actually gave a certificate to, which he was dragged into doing. But Mary Bowen, that's all she knew of him was from the studio. And I think she told me that he didn't know her name. So when he fills out the certificate, so what's your name? I should put in here, he would ask. And Mary Bowen. Oh, okay. And that was it. He didn't care, though. It wasn't like he felt badly that he didn't know anyone's name. He knew their body, and that's all he was cared about.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Hey, I want to remind everyone real quick that if you have any questions that you want me to ask towards the end of this webinar, please just pop them in the Q&A section and we'll get to them later. Just a quick little reminder. John, I would love to talk about the gymnasium a little bit. I feel like, today when I want to take a session, I have to make a call, I have to make an appointment, I have to buy a session package, there's some prerequisites, and in return I get 1 hour of personal attention from a teacher that it's only focused on me, and then I set my weekly appointment, and that's essentially how the Pilates industry now runs. And I understand that it was very, very different back in the day. So I would love for you to paint us a picture of what your experience of just fitting Pilates into your life looked like, and logistically how that all worked.
Well, yeah, it was very different. And I mean, what's crucial about the whole thing is it was extremely easy. You didn't make appointments. You didn't have a session with anyone. You after you learned, for the first, 10 times, 7 times, you really did have to try to figure out how to go at a time when Joe would be available, because no one else taught new people. He did that exclusively. Other people helped, and if he wasn't there, Bob Seed or Hannah or John Winter could pitch in, or even Clara. But you just went when you thought it was convenient for you, and when you try to coordinate the convenience for you and the availability of having some help at the beginning, because there was no way to get through this without help at the beginning. So you didn't call anyone. There was no phone in the studio. There was no appointment book. There was only one teacher, essentially, at the beginning. And after you got going a little, maybe 10 times, depending on, how quick you absorbed enough to just keep moving, John and Hannah, Clara, and even Joe, if he was teaching someone else, would help you out until you finally got it down pretty well, so that you could get through the routine. Yeah, it was extremely easy. On the other hand, 2 bad things. One bad thing is it wasn't a business, so you had no predictability in the studio or the gym, as he referred to it, as to how many people you had to have around. You didn't know. People could come, go, they wouldn't be around, they'd be here, no one called. So all of a sudden you're completely subject to other people's whims, no scheduling. It was very difficult to kind of see it as a business. And for the client, for the customer, While you didn't have an appointment, you didn't know what to expect. So if you had to come at lunch hour or you had to come at the end of the day, the place could be jammed. You couldn't find a apparatus. You couldn't get on a reformer. All right, so I'll go on a mat. Oh, wait a minute, they're all full. Oh, the chair's full. Oh, everything's full. There was no place to sit, and we weren't allowed to sit in the studio, in the gym, and watch others. You just weren't allowed to do it. Someone would ask you, well, you better come back. And so that was a bad thing from the client's point of view, and also a very bad thing from a business point of view, because sometimes I guess people never came back. They get frustrated, and that was it. So it was a very mom and pop kind of loosey-goosey thing that was great in one way, but had no possibility of expansion or even survival. We kept it that way all through Romana years afterwards. Romana did start to make appointments with people, and that was a bit of a shock to us, because part of the culture really was the freedom of just coming up and getting down, doing your work. And Romana started to say, well, all right, if you come at 9:30, I'll be here and I'll take care of you. And she did. Or she started to assign her interns to it. And it did somewhat regularize the business, but not anything to the extent it is today. Just
Yeah, one of the many things I love about the Cage Line is your ability to reconcile this idea that, Pilates is not what it used to be anymore. It has changed and evolved in many ways into an industry, into a business structure, and reconciling that with this idea and acknowledgement that Pilates needed to evolve in order to thrive as a business and as an industry. And I think you're doing such a wonderful job in breaking that down. And I am personally curious, because my own personal preferred way to practice is to just get on the equipment and just do it by myself. Do what I know. I love the occasional session, but I also just love being in my own space and move at my own time. And I feel like that's something that's very often lost in the modern practice, in the modern business model. And I'm just personally curious, do you yourself still practice that way as well, where you just get on the equipment and you do your own thing? You probably know it better than most of us.
I don't know better, but absolutely. I mean, if right next door, I have a absolutely gorgeous reformer, and I get on it. It's a meditation. I mean, people kind of laugh at you when they say, "Oh, it's a dynamic meditation." I get completely lost in doing the very same routine that I did in 1964. That's 56 years ago. And it just, time flies, my mind gets cleared. Yeah, I love to do that, but it's also important for me from time to time to have an instructor, because you get sloppy. Maybe you don't, but I certainly do. And you start to take shortcuts and stop doing certain things properly, and stop, you get out of touch with things. And once you sort of get lost in that meditative space, you're not as critical of yourself. And an instructor really does help. It's a different experience, no question. Having someone help you, or even standing over you, or watching you even virtually, and having a dialogue with you sort of breaks the really deep loss of yourself. It's strange to say that. Into the work. I mean, the work is all about you. It's all about you getting in touch with some part of you that you're not normally in touch with, how you move and how you make yourself move, and what's involved in triggering a movement. And when you're deep into that, someone's telling you, well, you better put your heels together, or straighten your legs a little more. Maybe your left leg isn't going out as far as your right. Or something. It breaks that to some extent. And Joe knew that. I mean, after you got the routine down, and that may take a year, no one interrupted you ever. I mean, and you could, room could have 12 people in it, and you could get on a reformer and right next to someone else on reformer, or right between people, and you could just get completely lost in doing that routine and get up from the reformer, say, I had enough, go to the shower, and never had said a word to anyone. And as you left, if Joe was there or Clara was there, you'd hand them $5 and sort of nod your head, and that was it. You walked out. You didn't say, "Oh, all right, Thursday at 4:00." No, you could go through the whole session without ever saying a word to anyone, and so they let you do that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder now that we're in this time where we obviously have to reimagine, reinvent the way that we practice Pilates, the way that we teach Pilates, the way that we communicate teacher to student. It makes me wonder if there might be room for that sort of self-responsibility and independence to become more relevant again in the way that Pilates is practiced. And that's, again, why I loved reading about that in such great detail and hearing what you have to say about that. At the same time, I think the fear that's often there is that Pilates is then done incorrectly. And if I understand correctly, that wasn't really a concern for Joseph Pilates back in the original studio. I mean, he had a knack for precision, obviously, and the way you sit, but there was also this idea, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the way that you learn the work is by just doing it and doing it often. So you said this earlier, there was no real cueing or correction in that regard. Is that true?
Well, that wasn't cueing, in the sense that the professionals study it today as something that they have to learn how to do. The one thing, and I did emphasize this in the book, and I've thought a great deal about it throughout my whole life, not necessarily in the Pilates contest, is negative versus positive reinforcement. And Joe did not know from negative reinforcement. You couldn't do anything wrong. I think Thelonious Monk once said, there is no wrong note in jazz. And that was, I think, something in Joe's head. There is no wrong exercise. If you're moving, it can never be wrong. Is there a better way to do it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? Is there a way that is better for your body, more symmetrical, so you won't get hurt? Yes. And that's where he guided you. And I thought about the word guided. He didn't cue you into, I mean, he would, for example, if you were doing, let's take the teaser. If you're doing the teaser And the way it's taught, I've seen now, is you start a lot easier. You start with your knees bent, your calves down. You didn't do that with Joe. He wanted you to have your legs straight. So if your legs weren't straight and you were trying to do the teaser and you didn't have your legs straight, he might say, straighten the legs. Or if you had a C curve in your back, he didn't know from a C curve, but if you had your back curled and he wanted your back straight, your shoulders back, he might poke his finger down, maybe 5 or 6 vertebrae down your spine, and just give you a little poke like that. And whoop, you sat up and you felt the sit up. You felt what it was like to have your shoulders back and your chest out and your spine straight. And that's what he wanted you to feel. He didn't want you to hear sit up. He wanted you to feel sit up. And so in terms of cueing, he cued you, but I don't think we'd call it cueing today. If you see some of those fairly rough films that you occasionally see, and you'll see where he put his hands on people. If you were doing something, if you're doing long spine or something, and he wanted your legs in a certain relationship to your torso, he would maybe just put his hand under your thigh and just put it there for a second, so you felt where he thought it should go. And that was it. That was it. It wasn't like, no, you've got to fire up your maximus glutamus and do it. None of that ever. So never used a technical term. I don't think he knew them.
That's
He
fascinating.
didn't know what to call any muscle.
To piggyback onto that, and this is an audience question actually, what about Clara? How was her teaching different? We often get the sense in the oral history of Pilates that Clara was the gentler one, the one that had the teaching sensibility, that was kinder and more accessible. Can you speak to that in comparison to what you just said about Joe?
Yeah, and I get that question frequently. People are very curious about Clara. I never saw Clara teach someone coming into the studio at an early stage from beginning to end. I never saw it. Ron Fletcher talked at one time or another about his relationship with Clara, because he did not have a good relationship with Joe. And he knew, I think he talked about it in the deposition, I'm not even sure where, but he knew there was something very important about Pilates for him. And he got that from Joe, somewhat, not too dissimilarly from my first experience. His was also very difficult. Joe was very rude to him, very demanding, and he had and maybe I did too, had a huge ego as to his own physical ability, athletic ability. And Joe, reduced you down to a blob of protoplasm on the reformer, just waiting desperately for him to tell you what to do, because you didn't know what to do. You couldn't think, the whole thing was extremely strange. So, but Clara somehow took him over. And maybe she taught him, from beginning to end. Clara mostly stood in the background and would watch from just where she is in that old photograph, sort of not in it at you, but there. And if she heard something, her vision was horrible. because she had cataract surgery in the early days and had Coke bottles sort of glasses, but her ears were extremely sensitive. She could hear things. She could hear the carriage squeaking in the frame. She could hear the springs not being pulled equally or symmetrically, or she could hear even you flopping around on the carriage, and she would be right at your side helping, and she knew exactly what to tell you to help you out, straighten you out. And that's my experience of her teaching. I never saw her stand over someone as Joe did. I never saw her bat back and forth between 2 or 3 or 4 clients. I never saw her do that. And she was gentle. She was very quiet, very shy, very frail. And she was in this nurse's uniform. You thought, oh my God, it's like a sanatorium up in the Alps for tuberculosis. I mean, it was not like you see your instructors today, male or female. They're ready for a workout there, and they look great. But not Clara. She looked like the nurse that was coming to administer oxygen to you. So she was an absolutely lovely person, extremely warm. You got that from her, and interested, and did learn your name, and did know everyone's name. And she was an assistant. She wasn't anything but an assistant.
Yeah. Did you see either of them, this is another audience question, ever demonstrate an exercise? Did they work out at the studio or show you how it's done?
The only time I ever saw any demonstration was Joe on the Bednasium, when he first, that was the bed that he had in his apartment next door. That was a trap table, and a bed that had this V split that is in the book, and I think there's even a drawing or patent drawing of it. And after I got up, I remember him. I have a picture in my mind of him jumping on the bed and doing leg circles, holding on to the bar above his head, and doing leg circles and saying something like, 15 minutes every day, and you'll never have a cold. I've never had a cold. So that's what he would say. So no, never demonstrated, never. And teaching, never. No one did. They had to get you to do it by feeling it.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
One question that sort of I just came up for me personally too. How fluent was Joseph Pilates in the English language? We have heard all kinds of accounts, yet he's also written books in his own right. What's your recollection of his grasp of the English language? I guess he didn't talk that much, but.
No, he had a heavy German accent, but he had a complete vocabulary. He didn't misuse words. He knew his grammar. There was never any point where I thought, oh, this guy is a foreigner. He spoke a very clear English with a very heavy German accent. And yeah, the accent may seem like he mangled words like breathe the air in instead of breathe. There are certain things in every language where if you don't learn that language as a child, your muscles in your mouth don't work as language demands, and you have an accent. So, but that was it. Whether he actually wrote one word of any of his two books, I have no idea. There are people that said they ghost wrote it or helped him. No, but he didn't speak like the Return to Life. He didn't. So it's pretty clear he had a lot of help with that. So
interesting.
yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. There are so many wonderful questions coming from the audience. So I'm just trying to pick one that I myself selfishly don't know the answer to. Do you have any knowledge of Joe's children and them being in the picture at all? Have you had any contact with them, or were they in the picture at all during the 60s, to your knowledge?
Not at all. I've never contacted them. I thought about it, particularly when I was spending a lot of time in France. My wife is fluent. My wife is German descent, fluent in German. And I thought of, we'll go drive over there, and, it's right next door. It's like going from New York to Maryland, and talk to him. But he never mentioned him. He never, I had no idea. I don't think he ever visited him in the, he didn't go to Germany in the years I knew him toward the end of his life. He had gone earlier. It may have been, very bad. First place, understand, I was never even slightly curious about it. It wasn't anything I thought about. I was trying to figure out how to get my life straightened out, and this was something that was sort of happening to me, but I had no thought to even ask him or press him on how'd you develop this, or where'd this come from, or do you have any family in Germany or any? I didn't know, who his friends were. I knew he went down to the Masons. That I knew, where there was a German, highly German demographic in one of the Masons. It was down, I think, around 25th Street. The people that took care of his burial. And he liked that. He'd go down there and drink beer with them. And, but I had no idea who his friends were, family, anything. And I wasn't curious. And then later, when I was trying to think of how I'm going to deal with the biographical aspects of him, I thought, well, I'll go to Germany. I had a friend in France who was one time a very famous journalist in Great Britain, and he kept saying, "Oh, you can't write a book like this without. You got to go and do all the research. You got to do this. You got to do that." But I didn't want to do it. I mean, I didn't want to. I didn't want to open that can of worms, and I wasn't even writing the book that interested in that. I was interested in my impression of him and trying to convey what it felt like to me to have known him. But I didn't care about the biography or his family or his kids or how they felt about him, which I didn't think could be very good. So I stayed away from it.
Yeah. Wow, it's so interesting to hear. And I wish I could ask you for 3 more hours about all the ins and outs of that. But I want to just ask very quickly one more question that has been asked a lot by the audience. Will you write a sequel?
I don't know. I mean, someone asked me, someone suggested to me the other day, you know what you ought to do is just write a book about all the questions and answers. And maybe that's it. I hadn't thought about it. I will. I actually do like to write, and I'm actually enjoying. I didn't think I would, but I'm enjoying this aspect of it, trying to get the word out about it and let people ask the questions. And it's great that people have questions. It's a big compliment, really, to me. They've read the book. They question things. So a sequel, I don't know, and I'm not sure I know very much more than I put in the book. I didn't know how much I knew when I started to write this book, and I was quite surprised. So who knows? But at the moment, I'm busy doing webinars and trying to get the word out on this book. Maybe when I get
Which
bored
we're
with this,
so grateful for. Yeah, well, if you need questions, there's a bunch of them here, and if I understand correctly, for everyone in this webinar right now, we will compile those questions and we'll get to those one way or another. I'll chip in as well. But I want to end with one more big question for John, which is, obviously my recommendation to everyone is, if you didn't already, go run, get the book. It's a wonderful account of John's experience with Joseph Pilates. It's not just about Pilates and history. It's also about the benefits of the work. John does a beautiful job describing the magic that happened in the original studio and so many events that have fallen under the radar in our modern history and how we typically talk about Pilates. And you just need to read it. I'm so glad that you took the time to speak with me and with everyone in this webinar today, but I want to send you off with this question. Or everyone rather, if there was one thing you would want every Pilates teacher, past, present, future, to know about Joseph Pilates, what would it be?
Well, it's a great question. And, the one thing is always a challenge, because you have to, there's 10 things, and now I got to put them in some kind of priority order. The one thing about Joe that I think is not only vital to every teacher, but is the thing that motivated him to create this thing and to keep working with it, is his deep, deep, deep care about other people. And he cared about you taking care of yourself. He cared about you remaining flexible, about your attitude toward life, about how your body worked and your happiness. He deeply cared about it. And the one thing about the whole Pilates community that to me is just so warming, I don't know any other word to use, is that and I don't know any exception, with no exception, everyone who teaches Pilates, who's involved with Pilates, has that same feeling. That's why they do it. It's not teaching ballet so there's a performance so an audience sees it. It's teaching and being involved in the person in front of you. it's helping that person. It's trying to guide that person into a better place, trying to help them with the how they stand, how they walk, how they get a dish off the top shelf, or play the violin, or play golf, or whatever it is. It's a deep feeling toward that other person's physicality. And what Joe left me with the impression, and I'm sure with everyone else, I'm just sure, is when he concentrated on you, he was as involved with you as humanly possible. There was no room for any distraction on his concentration or even on yours, but he conveyed that. And it's not like, you know, he was commiserating with how you're doing at work, or you're having trouble with your boss or your wife. It wasn't that. It was, how is this mass of protoplasm in front of me operating? Is it running highly efficiently? Is it running with enthusiasm? Is it running energetically? Is it are the pipes open? Is everything working right? And that's what his concentration was. And he could feel and see if it wasn't. He knew what was going on inside this bag of skin that we're all inside of. He knew it. And he was concentrating on it. He watched you walk in. He watched you walk out. He cared about making it better for you. He didn't want any applause for that. He didn't want any, you know, he didn't care if you said, "Oh, that was a great session." You didn't. He didn't care. He knew. He just looked at you walk out. If you walked out slumpy and grouchy a couple of times, maybe one time he'd say something or do something to kind of straighten you out. But it's the care. And that's what this business, and I use the word now, business is all about. It's caring for other people. So that's it. That's the answer.
Wow. Well, I gave you a big question. You delivered a perfect answer, and I can't think of a better way to end. Everybody, buy the book, read the book if you haven't already. If you have, read it again and again and again. John, thank you so much for your generosity in writing, for being an excellent writer, for doing this with me today, 6,000 miles apart. How can we find you? How can we get the book?
Well, you can get the book on Amazon, of course. You can get the book. You can go to your local bookstore. And I mean, that's what I would like to have happen, because I love bookstores. But you can go to your local bookstore and you have this book, or call them up, you have this book. And if they say no, say, could you order it? And they'll have it in a day or 2 days. And that's a great way to do it. If you want a Kindle book, you got to get it off Kindle. There is ebooks on other platforms. Amazon is, of course, the easiest. And I have a website which will click you through to Amazon. So I can save you a couple of clicks. Just go to Amazon or johnhowardsteele.com. And there's a button there, and you'll be in Amazon, and they'll sell you a book. So, amazing. And get it to you very quickly. But your local bookstore can do that too, and they'd love you to call them. They're hurting.
If they're open, please go visit the small businesses. We'll put the link to your website into the PDF that will go out to everybody who registered for today's event, along with the question and answers that we didn't get to. Again, thank you, Balanced Body, for organizing this and having us. It was an honor to speak with you today, John. Be well. And again, thank you so much for everything.
Great pleasure for me, Benjamin. It was wonderful, having the interaction with you. And when you're back here in Santa Barbara, we'll have a beer for sure.
Sounds great. Awesome.
All right.
I can't wait.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.